Today you're going to learn how to take a boring hi-hat loop that sounds like this and turn it into something that sounds alive and sounds like this. So let's dive right in. All right, this is the groove with the kick, clap, and the hi-hat that I've prepared myself. And this is the groove with the reference hat loop that I found from a sample pack. It's cool, but I want to know how to make it myself. How do I unboringify my loop? How do I make it more interesting? Well, that's a good question. Let's dissect the loop. What does this loop have that our loop doesn't? First of all, I hear more rhythmic variety in the sound. There is almost like a quick groove in the background that's like tick, 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 tick. Those are the 16th. So the first thing we're going to do is duplicate our main hi-hat that plays on every second to eighth note. So we have 2 layers. And on the second layer, we don't need the full clip. We're just going to delete the second half. And you can see these little loop markers, these little lines on the MIDI clip. We don't want that to be looped because as of now, it sounds like this. We want to have more of a larger canvas to work with. So what we're going to do is click this MIDI clip and hit Command J to consolidate. Then we have exactly 4 bars of a hi-hat canvas or hi-hat groove that we can play with. What I'd then like to do is hit Command A to highlight all these notes and shorten them down to a 16th. If you right click, you can also make sure that you're in the 16th grid. And then you want to make sure to drag your notes with Option. This little plus symbol appears. You can see that here. And drag it out like this. What you then want to do is then start messing around with the velocities. So basically the intensity or the volume of each and every single note. And what I usually like to do is start off with the first 4 notes. Start very low, go mid. Let me actually open up this panel here. And then go high, and then go back to mid. So you start low, go mid, high, go somewhere towards the middle. I highly recommend that you do this manually because you add more of that human touch to it. I know this might be a bit tedious and not as generative as many of the other strategies that there are, but it truly helps to take your time and also you get that practice in, right? And you can add variances to every part. So it doesn't always have to sound the same, but you just want to make sure that you have that main accentuation hi-hat, which is playing on every second eighth note. And if I'm really feeling like it, I can also do that to the very end of this 4-bar clip. Or if I'm feeling somewhat lazy, I can just take this and duplicate it over. So we have that background 16th groove or the accentuation groove already there. This is how it sounds so far. Okay, we're getting some phasing. That means that our hi-hats, the main hi-hat and this hi-hat, which is basically the same one, they're clashing, resulting in that laser-ish type sound effect on every second eighth note. That means we have to switch out the hi-hat sound. So we're going to right-click it, show in browser, and look for another hi-hat sound. And you can do that by hot swap mode. Click on this little knob here. We're getting there. But let's look for another sound. So let's go back into hot swap and keep on clicking ourselves through sounds until we find one that sounds somewhat subtle. And you can reference your reference loop at any time. Okay, so let's go back. I kind of like this one because it's very short. Go out of hot swap mode by clicking that little X. Dial down the sustain, preferably also the decay, so we get a very short and snappy signal. This is how it sounds in total. What we're then going to do is add modulation to the sound so it sounds different on each and every single hit, because right now we have a very static groove. And you could go into the controls panel over here and start modulating these parameters, but in some cases they're grayed out. I can't really figure out why. So I mostly just use an LFO, put it right after my hi-hat sound. And I find this to be a far easier way to approach this because I can just click map it to a variety of different parameters. I can also go into multi-map here, click map it to the decay, and then hit play. So now at a rate of 1 Hertz, it is adding some longer notes or some shorter notes. But let's say we want to have our note rate. So at every 4th bar, he changes the decay and sustain, maybe a bit less intensity. So dial down the depth, maybe a bit more. Cool. And we can also modulate the attack. So let's go back into multi-map, click map, click on attack. And I want less intensity on the attack. So I'm going to dial down the output to, let's say 25%. Maybe a bit more. Yeah. So you see some hits have more of that click and some hits have more of like a shaker type vibe. So they slide in, they fade in. Nuances like these really add a lot of difference to the sound. We're going to go into controls over here, go back into multi-map. We still have a few parameters left here. Click map and also map the detune. Detune is basically like pitching the sound up and down at a very minor amount. So we get different tonalities, different tune for every single hi-hat sound. This is how it sounds. It's very subtle. If we were to delete the mapping and put it on the transpose, you can hear more difference. But in my opinion, that's just a bit too intense. So I'm going to put it back on the detune here. You can also transpose your hi-hat sound up or down. But I'm going to leave it at 0 for now. Let's map more. So we're going to map it to the random pan, which means that it'll go from left to right. Let's just put it down to 35%. Just a bit. Just like sparkle it there. And you can just map whatever the heck you want, honestly. It's just about adding more movement, and LFO allows you to add movement without having to automate and tweak parameters yourself. So let's do one more. Let's click map and map this to the velocity. So this affects how intense the velocity shift is. And what you can do is always go back into hot swap mode to switch out your sound. Nice. And now we just want to add a bit more fullness to the sound, so we can duplicate this entire layer and perhaps add a different hi-hat to the second layer. And you don't necessarily need to use hi-hats. You can also use shakers. Shakers work fantastically with these type of 16th grooves. Yeah, and then you can start panning. So let's say our main layer, we're going to pan to the left, and our secondary layer that we just created, we're going to pan to the right. So we get more of a stereo image again. Yeah, I like how the hits are always different. On some hits, we get more of a click, and on some other hits, it sounds softer. And we still get that main hi-hat groove punching through here. Keep in mind that the main hi-hat, that's always going to be the focus. So no matter how many of these 16th grooves you put in, that 8th note, that oots, 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 that's always going to be the one that's piercing through. So we're getting there. Listen to the reference here. I feel like there's a bit more variation on the main hat. So let's go back to the main hat and add some more variation to it. I'm just going to give you a few effects that I really love using on my main hi-hat to give them life. Erosion being one of those effects. Erosion adds a lot of those high frequencies. Sine, noise, wide noise. Noise usually works well on hi-hats. Just got to make sure that it's placed before your EQ because it adds a lot of low frequency mud. So let's give it a play with the entire groove here. It also makes every hi-hat sound a bit different. You got to go really careful though. Let's add wide noise here. And if you pitch your sample up, go into controls, pitch it up, it'll sound different. Let's dial down the amount. Let's try Redux. Redux is a bit crusher that I like using. It's also Ableton stock, so really great. Add a bit of jitter. Jitter creates randomness. Mess around with these settings, have a bit of fun. See if you can get any interesting results, and always A/B. So make sure to mute your effects and reblend them in. I feel like Redux isn't doing that much, to be honest, but I'll just leave it there. Another one that you can use is Flanger. Flanger does a lot. Ableton Live has this effect, this audio effect called Phaser Flanger. They added this in Ableton Live 11. It allows you to switch between phaser, flanger, and doubler. And you can test out these individual presets. I find them all to sound very amazing. Let's add a bit of warmth and dial down the dry wet. Yeah, you can see how every hi-hat sounds slightly different. And you can test out these modes. Let's go into flanger, doubler. Really, really cool stuff here. Just try yourself out. Have some fun. This is basically just sound design, what we're doing, right? Just tweaking knobs, seeing what resonates with us, what sparks any type of feeling, what sounds interesting. I like flanger. You just want to crank your feedback until you hit that sweet spot. You don't want it to sound like a laser, but you almost want it to sound like a laser. And remember, all these effects are before our EQ. With the EQ, we can really control which frequencies come through. So before our effects, it sounds like this. I'll solo the hi-hat for you guys. With the effects, life. We just breathed in life. And one more. Shifter is really cool. I love using shifter generally on drums. It's a really cool way to pitch your hi-hat sounds without losing the quality, and it really works well on transient signals. You just want to make sure that it's on frequency here. Mess around with the fine tune. This way you can pitch it up a bit or pitch it down a bit. So we're basically just determining the timbre of the sound, the tone color. Can also make it go wide. Let's listen to how it sounds in total. Yeah, let's crank down the feedback on the flanger here. And you can also mess with the chorus, which drastically changes the pitch. Same thing goes for the main hi-hat. We can just duplicate the main hi-hat layer, and on that second layer you can then search for maybe a different sound, maybe an open hi-hat sound. These are all closed hi-hat sounds. Open hats tend to sound a bit more sharp, like this one over here. Let's delete the erosion effect perhaps, make it cut through a bit more. Go into controls, change the pitch down to 0. Maybe delete all of the effects. So duplicating your layers once you've processed them and then removing the effects gives you a bit more control over the sound in general. And it lets you decide whether you want to keep certain effects or not. So what does the main hi-hat groove also have that my loop doesn't? I feel like the main hi-hats have a bit of room. They have a bit of reverb on them, but very unnoticeable, almost to the point where it feels like there isn't any reverb on them. So let's group our hi-hats, our main hi-hats, and let's also give them a slightly different color. And on the main group over here, we're going to call this one hats main. We're going to now send these to our return A, which is our reverb. So if you open up this little R over here, you get to see your reverb and delay. So what you want to do is the reverb effect that is by default loaded on one of these return channels, dial down the decay. We don't want that much of a noticeable reverb. So put the decay down, emphasize the higher frequencies with this filter input here. Let's see how it sounds if we send in our hi-hats here. So you see the hi-hats group. We're just going to send them into track A, return A. Ah, you see? That's the reverb there. And you just want to dial down until you feel like you barely hear the reverb. Like there is a room, but it's not noticeable. I like that. Another thing you can do is then add groove. Groove adds a lot of timing variety to your hi-hat sounds, especially the 16th, but it's something to be very careful with. You usually don't want to add too much groove. I like these MPC grooves. These swing MPC are my favorite ones. You can find them in the grooves panel over here. You then can open up your groove pool and just drag in the ones you like. These 74, 71, these are way too intense. I believe the number at the end indicates how many milliseconds the groove is adjusted. We're looking for 16th groove because we want to adjust the 16th hi-hats here, but we don't want that much of an intense one. So let's go for 54 and 57. So now we can close the groove pool. And if we open up our hi-hats, so double click the MIDI clip, you can then choose the groove from within this grooves panel over here. And I'm going to select it here and do that for the other layer as well. So double click the MIDI clip and select the groove. Let's see how it sounds. Cool. If we open up the groove pool, we can then reduce the timing, so then we get more of our original signal to come through. You see? Without groove, with groove. It's like a bit off. The timing is a bit off, and that makes it sound a bit more human. You can also add some randomness. That gets really weird. Or you could also just change the global amount. So you can also dial this up to 130% to just give a bit more groove here. But again, be very cautious with how you add groove. You usually don't want too much groove. So play around with the timing knob here. And another bonus tip of mine is to right click your reference sample, and then you can also click extract groove here. It'll take a bit of time to load until it fully extracts the groove. That groove is then automatically added to your groove pool over here. So then we can double click our MIDI clip again and highlight our groove here that we've just extracted. So reference hat loop here, and do that for the lower layer as well. And let's give it a play. It's not always 100% accurate. It gives you some inconsistencies in between, but that can be really cool if you'd like. And after you've done all this, what I highly recommend you do is group all of your hi-hats into another group, call them hats all. On this group, you want to add some kind of distortion or anything that'll just overdrive or just crunch up your hi-hats. I like overdrive because it's more of a harsh distortion effect, so you can then just add maybe just the higher frequencies in the distortion here. Ooh, sounds pretty harsh. Let's dial down the tone, the dry wet, set it to 100. And you want to get creative here. You want to add effects that give the overall groove a bit of texture. So then again, you can add something like erosion. Let's add an EQ afterwards just to keep it clean. And you can add perhaps auto pan to give it a bit more panning. Just a bit, right? We don't want to make it too noticeable. And for a bit more rhythmic variety, you can then add beat repeat, which I really love using on hi-hats. You can find that under delay loop. And there is this preset called microfills. Put it here. That'll just give you these little interesting fills in between. And then what you want to do is create a new audio track. And in that audio track, click resampling, solo the hats all group, record arm this track, and just let it run through. Cool. Now you can remove all of the effects or mute them for now and mix in your distorted affected signal with the main signal here. And then we can perhaps send the affected signal into our reverb again. I like that. And to top it off, you can group your affected signal with the hats all group. So we're multi-grouping here, and we're going to call this hats above all. And on this group, we're going to load up a glue compressor just to make sure that we catch those peaks. If you'd like to watch a video on mixing where I elaborate on how compression works, then check out this video over here somewhere. So you see how that main hi-hat pierces through. We're compressing that here by setting a very low threshold and increase the gain accordingly. So it's jumping to about 5 dB. That's why we're going to set it to about 5 dB here as well. And at this point, you just need to set your levels right. So you want to make sure to mix in the individual hi-hat sounds to your liking. Solo your way through them. And just add layers until you feel like you get a sound that sounds really full. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you learned something new. If you did, like and subscribe. It does help the channel. And if you like these sounds, grab them on LotusTunes. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.